Ma'am, I'd like to be in your fashion show and academy, Nancy said, stepping directly into Madame Gina's path before anyone could stop her. I'd love to bring in a merge of Nigerian and Korean culture. Just look at this. It would be so beautiful standing beside your work. She lifted the fabric so the light caught every thread. Gina turned slowly. Excuse me? The whole room seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere behind Gina, her assistant shifted, visibly uncomfortable, the way people do when they can feel a storm building. Don't tell me, Gina said, eyes narrowing, that what you're talking about is one of those things you're wearing. Nancy smiled. You must have good eyes. It's beautiful, isn't it? The room went silent. Excuse you, Gina. She pressed a hand to her temple, and immediately one of her assistants rushed forward to fan her, as though the very sight of the fabric had given her a migraine. Someone like you shouldn't even have to ask me such a question. Nancy rolled her eyes, unbothered. I guess people were right about you. Right about what? That knowing how to dress people isn't the same as understanding fashion. Real fashion listens, it borrows, it grows. You've been designing the same silhouette for 10 years and calling it heritage. That's not knowledge, ma'am. That's comfort. Gina's mouth fell open. For a moment, she had nothing at all to say, which seemed to make her angrier than any insult could have. A photographer near the stage lowered his camera just slightly, sensing correctly that this exchange was about to become far more interesting than the runway show itself. You dare, Gina finally managed, voice rising with every word, lecture me at my own event about what fashion is? I'm not lecturing you. I'm informing you. There's a difference, the same way there's a difference between wearing a culture and understanding one. Gina's assistant made a small, strangled sound, as though she'd swallowed her own gasp halfway. Nobody will hire you! Your colorful fabric, or whatever you call it, will never soar here. Nancy simply smiled and turned, walking away with her hips swaying, unhurried, unbothered, leaving behind a room full of Seoul's fashion elite that didn't quite know where to look or what exactly they had just witnessed. She was a designer struggling to survive in a city that had never once made room for her. Not lazy, never lazy, just endlessly, quietly determined to build something no one had built before. A bridge between two worlds that refused to speak the same language.
Welcome to Africa House of Stories, where two worlds collide, hearts connect, and every story leaves a mark.
She had no idea that across the room a man had watched the entire exchange without blinking once, without so much as touching the glass of champagne someone had pressed into his hand an hour earlier. Look at that pattern, Baek Sin Jo murmured. The material. That must be some new Korean luxury design. I've never seen anything like it. James turned to stare at him, genuinely startled. Sir, are you actually impressed? Would you like to know my answer, or would you rather follow the lady? Follow the... Sir, wait, are we hiring her or are we kidnapping her? Sin Jo turned his head slowly, and the look he gave James could have stripped the varnish off a table. Hiring, James said quickly. Obviously hiring. I was joking. He laughed nervously. But Sin Jo was already moving, and James, confused but well-trained, hurried after him, only to find that by the time they reached the street, Nancy was already sliding into a cab. He didn't chase it on foot. He simply got into his own car, followed at a careful distance, learned exactly which building she disappeared into. You've never done this before, James said carefully. Not once, not even for the actress who sent flowers to your office 3 times a week for an entire month. This is due diligence. Due diligence doesn't usually come with that particular look on your face, sir. What look? The one you're making right now, the one that suggests you have completely forgotten the world exists. Sin Jo said nothing, which James had long since learned was the closest thing to a confession he was ever going to get. Because that was the part no one at the fashion show knew. Baek Sin Jo wasn't only a man with impeccable fashion taste. He was, quietly and dangerously, one of the most feared men in Seoul, a mafia boss whose empire ran on consequences swift enough that few people ever tested his patience twice. His own staff, when they were certain he couldn't hear, called him Mr. Unimpressed, because nothing, no woman, no deal, no threat had ever managed to hold his attention past the first 5 minutes. Until tonight. Nancy, meanwhile, arrived home with a groan loud enough to wake the building, only to stop dead in her doorway. Her Korean best friend was spinning in the middle of the living room wearing one of Nancy's own Ankara gowns like she'd been born in it. "This is lovely, Nancy." "Chae-sin, tell that to Madam Gina. She called it a waste." Chae-sin's eyes lit with fire instantly. "Excuse me? I need her number and address." "And what exactly will you do?" "Nothing much," Chae-sin said sweetly, cracking her knuckles. "I just want to speak to her, woman to woman." "I know you, Chae-sin. You are unhinged." "I'm passionate. There's a difference." She struck another pose. "How could she? When I wore this outfit out, do you know how many suitors I picked up? One from England, one from China. I don't even like him, he laughs like a hyena. One from Russia, and finally," she pressed both hands to her chest, blushing furiously, "the one I'm actually considering. A tall, dark, devastatingly handsome Nigerian Yoruba king." "You've been obsessed ever since you came back from Lagos." "I am not obsessed. I am in love. This man will be my husband." "Sure he will. Now give me my dress back." Chae-sin grabbed her purse instead, already backing toward the door. "See you later." "No, you are not stealing another one of my gowns. Who even let you in here?" "You gave me your key, remember? I am your better half." "You are not my better half. You are a menace." What followed was an entirely undignified chase around a very small apartment, over the couch, around the kitchen island, until Chae-sin finally reached the door and yanked it open. "Love you, my love. My Nigerian date is waiting. We will definitely get married." The door slammed. Nancy stood there, breathless and laughing despite herself, before the laughter faded into something quieter. She looked around her cramped workspace, fabric scraps everywhere, half-finished sketches taped to the wall, and let herself wonder just for a second whether any of this would ever become something real. The next morning, Nancy was working her usual shift at the cafe when Mrs. Choi walked in, practically glowing. "Nancy, your hands are truly blessed. I wore your African piece to my meeting and now everyone there wants one. I told them nobody makes them better than you." "Oh my God, Mrs. Choi, you really love me that much?" "I don't want to exaggerate. I am literally your Korean mother. I need to look out for you. You will triumph. I believe that with my whole heart, and I have never once been wrong about a talented woman in my 61 years on this earth." Nancy's eyes stung. She didn't notice the man in sunglasses seated 3 tables away, coffee untouched for 15 minutes. "Sir," James whispered, leaning close, "you need to stop staring." Sin Jo said nothing until Nancy finally approached his table, and then he removed the sunglasses like he'd been waiting the entire time to do it. "Can I have your order?" "Your talent," he said, "is remarkable. What's your secret? These must be some kind of new Korean luxury design pieces." "They're not," Nancy said flatly, already regretting walking over. He cut her off before she could say anything else. "I need you to come work for me. I need everything you have, the techniques, the designs, all of it. Where you get your materials." Beside him, James winced and whispered, "Couldn't you at least try to be a little nicer?" Nancy folded her arms, genuinely offended now. The arrogance! First of all, these are Nigerian-originated pieces, not Korean luxury anything. Second, you're speaking to me like you want to buy me, not hire me. I am not for sale. Since you won't be ordering anything, enjoy your day. She turned and walked off without looking back. Sin Jo sat there for a long moment, stunned. She just walked out. Away from me. "Oh, I thought she walked toward you, sir," James said, deadpan. "What did you say to me?" "I'm only saying if you'd been a little less authoritative, she might have actually listened." He tried again the following day. Flowers first. An enormous, absurdly expensive arrangement that took up half the cafe counter and made her coworkers stare. Nancy sent them back within the hour, note unopened. He tried imported Korean silk next, the finest bolt he designed personally. Nancy returned it wrapped in brown paper with a single line scrawled across the top. "I already have fabric." He tried, against James's increasingly frantic advice, a formal employment contract with numbers large enough to make James's own hands shake just holding it. Nancy read exactly 2 lines before tearing it cleanly in half and handing the pieces back to the courier. "Sir," James said, staring at the torn paper once it was returned to the car. "She tore your contract." Sin Jo came back the next day without the sunglasses, and this time without the arrogance either. He told her plainly, standing there in the middle of the cafe like a man who'd rehearsed the words a dozen times and still hadn't gotten them exactly right, that he hadn't meant to insult her, that he'd genuinely never seen fashion like hers before, that he was inspired by her art, and he apologized, sincerely enough that James, standing off to the side, murmured, "My boss is so grown," entirely to himself. "I can hear you, James." Nancy laughed despite the chaos. "So, Madame Gina is your rival for the upcoming show?" "She's not my rival. She's just a woman who thinks she owns the entire idea of fashion." "You should have said that earlier, Mr. Sin Jo. I would have agreed earlier." "I will be glad to help you win and beat her at it." The weeks that followed became the foundation of everything. Nancy sewed precisely, patiently, walking him through fabrics from across Nigeria, Ankara, Adire, Aso Oke, explaining what each one meant, where it came from, why the boldness was never accidental. "This one," she said one night, holding up a deep indigo threaded with gold, "is Adire. It's resist dyed. You tie certain sections of the cloth so the dye can't reach them, and the pattern is made from everything you refuse to let the color touch." "So the pattern comes from restraint," he said, surprised. "I thought otherwise." "See? You're already arguing and agreeing with me at the same time." He brought out swatches of hanbok silk, pale celadon, soft plum, fabric so fine it seemed to weigh nothing at all. "This takes a master 3 weeks to finish a single bolt, meant to look barely touched by human hands." "That's the opposite of everything I make." "Exactly," he said. "That's why it might actually work." Chai Sin was there most evenings too, perched on the counter, offering commentary nobody asked for. "Well, well, well," she said one night, watching the two of them hunched over the same sketch, heads nearly touching. "You guys act like—" "Don't," Nancy said quickly. "I wasn't going to say anything," Chai Sin grinned. It was happening quietly, the way real things happened. Sin Jo began remembering her coffee order without being told. He noticed the exact moment her shoulders started to sag from exhaustion and pulled out a chair before she asked. When a supplier spoke to her dismissively over the phone, he took it from her hand and ended the call with 4 words that had the man calling back within the hour, growling. "Sir," James said one afternoon, unable to help himself, "you smile now, around her." "I don't smile." "You did yesterday. I have a photograph." "Delete it." "I have 3 copies." "James." Jason cornered Nancy separately, entirely unprompted. "You like him." "I do not." "You look at him like how I look at my tall chocolate king. Please, for the love of everything, stop comparing every single thing in my life to your chocolate king." "You'll understand," Jason said with the total unshakable confidence, "when you meet yours." But warmth wasn't the only thing that followed them. Madame Gina, hearing that Sin Jo's fashion house intended to enter the same competition, grew desperate in ways neither of them expected. First, a rumor spread that Nancy's fusion concept had been copied from an old European sketchbook, a claim so flimsy it fell apart the moment anyone looked closely, but loud enough, for a few days, to sting. "Don't," Jason said, physically taking the phone out of Nancy's hand before she could read another comment. "Don't let strangers decide what you are." It took James less than a day to trace the story back to Gina's own publicist, and less than an hour after that for Sin Jo to make a single quiet phone call that resulted in a full public retraction by the following evening. "See?" Jason said, taping the retraction to the studio wall like a trophy. "The truth always catches up. Sometimes it just needs a terrifying boyfriend to help it along." "He is not my boyfriend." There was another visitor that same week, one Nancy hadn't been warned about. A man in an expensive coat appeared at the studio door one evening, glancing around at the fabric, the sketches, at Nancy herself with the kind of interest that made the back of her neck prickle. "Sin Jo," the man said pleasantly. "Fashion now. How domestic of you." "Say what you came to say, Director O." "There are people who still remember what you used to be before all this," O said, eyes cutting toward Nancy. "It would be a shame if someone reminded them, or reminded your new friend here." Sin Jo stepped forward, voice dropping to something Nancy had never heard him from before. "Touch her, and you will learn exactly what I used to be, in detail and in style." O smiled thinly and left without another word. Nancy waited until the door shut behind him. "What was that?" "It's old business. It has nothing to do with you." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you tonight." His voice softened just slightly, in a way she was still learning to recognize. "There are things about my life I hope you never have to see. I would burn every last piece of it down before it reached you." She didn't sleep well that night, turning his words over and over, but by morning she'd decided something simple. She trusted him, and trust, once given, wasn't something she gave up easily. Gina tried once more, this time attempting to have half the finished collection misplaced during a supposed inventory check 3 days before the show. Nancy arrived at the studio to find racks empty, panic rising instantly in her chest. "She's trying to make us miss the deadline." For the first time since she'd known him, Sin Jo looked genuinely rattled, because this was Nancy's dream unraveling in front of him, and there was no supplier he could simply threaten into fixing it. "Then we don't remake it. We rebuild it faster than she thinks is possible. Tonight. All of us." What followed were 2 sleepless nights. Nancy, Sin Jo, James, Chae-Sin, and Mrs. Choi all crammed into the studio, hands raw, coffee cold, laughter breaking the exhaustion every few hours just to keep everyone upright. "Sir," James announced somewhere around midnight, holding up a sleeve stitched so crookedly it looked borrowed from an entirely different jacket. "I would like it noted that I was hired for logistics, not tailoring." "Fix it, James." "With what skills, sir?" "Hand it to Chae-Sin." "I heard that," Chae-Sin called from across the room. "I'm still fixing Mrs. Choi's zipper disaster." "It is not a disaster," Mrs. Choi said with great dignity. "It is a design choice. The zipper is inside the sleeve, Mrs. Choi. A very avant-garde design choice." Even exhausted to the point of tears, Nancy found herself laughing so hard at one point she nearly stitched her own sleeve to her sweater. Sin Jo, watching her laugh in the middle of chaos she didn't ask for and didn't deserve, thought that he would happily do this every single night for the rest of his life if it meant watching her laugh like that at the end of it. Mrs. Choi kept everyone fed on rice and pure, stubborn optimism, refusing to let anyone stop for longer than it took to eat. Around 2 in the morning, Chae-Sin found a stray bolt of leftover Ankara, and without asking anyone's permission, fashioned herself a headscarf out of it, declaring that if she was going to lose an entire night of sleep for this collection, she was at least going to look magnificent doing it. "You look ridiculous," Nancy told her, laughing. "I look inspired. There's a difference." Jason struck a pose against the doorway. "Besides, my Nigerian man would approve." "Everything is about your Nigerian man." "Everything is about love, Nancy. You'll understand eventually." They finished with 6 hours to spare. "What if she's right?" Nancy asked quietly in the last hour before dawn, when everyone else had drifted off on couches and folded arms. "What if my dream just doesn't belong here?" "Then don't make it belong here," he said. "Make people realize it was always supposed to be here." "That's easy for you to say. You've never had to prove you belong anywhere." "You'd be surprised." His voice went quiet in a way she hadn't heard from him before. "I spent years being underestimated by men who thought fashion made me soft. I let them think it, because it kept them from looking too closely at everything else I was doing. You're not the only one who's had to build something people expected to fail." She hadn't expected that. "Why haven't you told me that before?" "Because you never needed to hear it before. You needed to hear it tonight." Their hands reached for the same swatch of fabric and stopped, fingers brushing, neither pulling away. The night of the show, Madame Gina arrived glowing with certainty, entirely unaware her sabotage had failed twice over. "I will definitely win," she told her assistant, smoothing her gown. "Congratulations in advance, ma'am," her assistant murmured, already knowing better than to disagree. Gina's collection, to be fair, was extraordinary. Korean tradition rendered in flawless modern lines, silk moving like water across the runway. The audience applauded generously. She soaked in every second. Then Sin Jo's fashion house was announced, and the room shifted. The first model walked out in a Korean silhouette tailored to precision, except for the sleeve, Ankara, bold and unapologetic, cutting straight through the restraint like a declaration. The audience leaned forward. The second model wore a gown folding Nigerian print into Korean formal wear so seamlessly it looked inevitable, as if the two traditions had simply been waiting decades to meet. Phones came up everywhere. A critic in the second row stood without realizing he'd done it. The third piece drew an audible gasp from the crowd. A floor-length gown with a bodice built entirely from layered Ankara pleats, fanning outward like a peacock's tail, falling into the clean architectural lines of a traditional Korean skirt, as though two entirely different rivers had finally agreed to run into the same sea. By the fourth look, a men's suit, sharp Korean tailoring accented with Ankara at the cuffs, the entire room was on its feet. Then Nancy walked out herself, wearing the final piece of the collection, a fusion so striking the room went utterly silent before it erupted. Sin Jo followed in the matching design, and when they reached the end of the runway together, the applause was thunderous. Madame Gina's smile vanished entirely. "Well, it's not even that great," she muttered. Her assistant, jaw still hanging open, said without thinking, "Actually, it is." "Excuse me?" Nothing, ma'am." They began calling the winner shortly after. Gina stood early, already certain, smoothing her dress in preparation for the walk. "The winner is," the announcer said, drawing out the pause with theatrical cruelty, "Sin Jo Fashion House." Gina froze halfway out of her seat. Sin Jo walked toward the stage, and as he passed her row, he slowed just enough to say, "Slow down, Gina," with a smirk that made her sit right back down without another word. He didn't accept the award alone. "This belongs to only one person, a woman I am endlessly inspired by, a strong woman who brought her culture into a world that told her more than once that it didn't belong." He called Nancy up, her eyes filled before she could stop them. They collected 4 more awards that night. Gina scoffed through every single one. "An award is basically just made of glass. Why is everyone smiling like it's an Olympic medal?" "You smiled wider than that when you won last year, ma'am." "Do you want to lose your job?" "No, ma'am." "Then let's leave." They left before the final round of applause had even faded. Nancy's career changed overnight after that. International brands called within the week. Magazines that had never once printed her name suddenly wanted full interviews, full spreads, full apologies disguised as compliments. Within a year, she'd launched her own label, one that carried both cultures in every single stitch, one that never had to explain itself to anyone. Sin Jo stood beside her through all of it, never once trying to take credit for what she'd built, never once letting her forget how far she'd come from the woman Gina swore would never soar. 2 of Gina's own 2 biggest sponsors quietly withdrew within the month, unwilling to be associated with a name so publicly tied to sabotage, and the industry, in its own slow and merciless way, finished the sentence Nancy had started at that very first fashion show. Sin Jo and Nancy's friendship became something neither of them tried to name for a while, until one evening in the very studio where it all started, surrounded by the same fabric scraps and the same stubborn sewing machine, he knelt down and opened a small box that held, instead of a ring, a folded scrap of a D-ray wrapped around it. "I wanted you to see this before the ring," he said, uncharacteristically nervous. "It's the first piece we ever made together. Badly. James can confirm it was terrible." "It was genuinely awful," James called from somewhere near the door, not even pretending he and Che Sin hadn't been listening the whole time. "But it was ours," Sin Jo continued, ignoring him entirely. "Everything after it was ours too. I don't want to build anything else in my life that isn't." Nancy was already crying before he finished the sentence, and she said yes before he'd technically finished asking, which he pointed out, laughing, was against protocol. "Since when do you care about protocol?" "Since never. Marry me anyway." "Obviously." Sin burst fully into the room at that point, no longer pretending, and threw her arms around both of them so hard she nearly knocked the ring box out of his hand. "I told you," she said for possibly the 100th time that year. "I told you, I told you, I told you." "You told everyone," James muttered, despite himself. "You told the doorman, you told the fabric supplier, you told a stranger on the subway." "The stranger agreed with me," Sin said proudly. "He said they looked like a movie. I have never felt more validated in my life." The wedding combined both worlds the way their collection always had. Ankara draped beside traditional Korean wedding garments, colors and silhouettes that shouldn't have belonged together, somehow completing each other perfectly. Sin stood radiant at the ceremony beside a tall, broad-shouldered Nigerian man who looked at her like she'd personally hung the moon. "I told you," she whispered to Nancy, grinning so wide it looked painful. James, standing at the edge of the reception with a drink he'd forgotten to sip, found himself pulled onto the dance floor by one of Nancy's cousins. He danced badly and repeatedly, and by the end of the night had somehow agreed to visit Lagos. "I am simply a matchmaker," Sin told Nancy proudly. "It's a gift." "You matched no one. James got dragged onto a dance floor." That's how it always starts. Years later, and older Nancy and Sin Jo sat in front of their grandchildren. "And that is how I met your grandmother," an older Sin Jo said to two little girls squealing in excitement. "I was crazy over her." Sin Jo looked at Nancy. She smiled and let him tell it. The fashion show, the argument with Madame Gina, the sabotaged fabric, the fake blog story, the missing collection, the Ankara that refused again and again, no matter who tried, to be buried. "You made it sound like a movie, Grandpa," the older one said. "It was a movie. I was simply very handsome in it." "He was not that handsome," Nancy said. "He was arrogant. I had to tear up his contract." "You tore up a contract?" the younger grandchild gasped, delighted. "In half," Nancy said proudly, "in front of the courier." "Ooh, I love love," the 14-year-old grandchild sighed, hand pressed dramatically to her chest. An epic match. The 11-year-old could only stare in awe. Their daughter, Nancy and Sin Jo's own 35-year-old now, walked in and kissed both children on the head. "Mind you, my parents have told me this story 806 times. "No way, Mommy." "Yes way." Everyone laughed. One of the children tugged on Nancy's sleeve. "Grandma, what about Auntie Sin? Did she get her tall, dark chocolate king?" "Of course she did," Nancy said, smiling. "She relocated. She became the happiest bride in Lagos." "And Uncle James," the older grandchild asked, "didn't he marry a Nigerian woman too?" "He did," Sin Jo said, allowing himself a rare, full smile. "Worst dancer I have ever seen in my life. Married anyway." "And Madame Gina," the younger one pressed, "what happened to her?" Nancy and Sin Jo exchanged a look, the kind two people share only after surviving the same story together. "She retired quietly," Nancy said diplomatically, "somewhere very far from fabric." "She lost," Sin Jo said, far less diplomatically, and the whole room burst out laughing. "She did send one letter years later," Nancy admitted, smiling. "Very short. It said, and I quote, 'Your work has grown on me.'" 4 words, Sin Jo said, "after everything." "I framed it anyway," Nancy said. "Some victories you keep, even the small, badly written ones." The children cheered like it was the ending they'd been waiting for all along. And here comes the end of Sin Jo and Nancy's story. Oh my, what a beautiful tale. I think I need to find myself a level of my own now before my own grandmother starts asking questions. Team Sin Jo and Nancy forever. They are my role models. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from.